Cool. So, Potter, I think you're a closer here, man.
Yeah. Let's bring the house down. All right. Can you see that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So this is a an element that I discovered as I was migrating some courses. Sorry, my family's in the background screaming.
Okay, and send it to me.
Hey, keep it down out there. I'm trying to give this amazing presentation.
How is it going?
It's good. You're on camera.
Hi.
Hashtag work from home.
Michael.
She says I'm not very good. Okay. Hey, we'll see ya. All right, so now the presentation has begun. So anyway, throughout our courses, we have, we're loading iframes from a service that's called H5P. And the loading experience isn't that great because sometimes it takes the H5P content a little while to load in an iframe, which means that whenever the user first loads the page, the iframe could be 0 pixels tall and it's waiting for the content to load. And so the user could scroll past that content without even knowing that there's something that's sitting there waiting, trying to load. So what we wanted to do was give a little loading indicator for an iframe. So here's what we have in the code. It's just an iframe that points to an H5P element. So how can we augment that? We created a little iframe loader, and it's very simple. The only thing it does is it has a loading state, and if it's in the loading state, it's displaying the loading indicator, which is just this little CSS loader. So let's just wrap this element around the iframe to see what that looks like. So now that the iframe is in a loading state, it displays the little loading indicator, and as soon as the web component kind of figures out, and we'll look at it, figures out that the iframe has loaded, then it disables the loading state and it displays the iframe. I went through a few iterations of how this web component figures out that this iframe is loaded. I actually just changed it. Right now, what it does is, let's walk through it a little bit, is again, we have this loading state. So if we're loading, we are going to just toggle some CSS classes. And what that's going to do, it's going to toggle whether this loading screen is being shown or this slot is being shown. And the slot contains the iframe. So that's pretty normal. What it's also doing is we are looking at the, let me bump that up a bit. We're looking at whenever this web component first loads, we're gonna get a flattened node observer, which is actually a Polymer function, a little Polymer utility I forgot existed. And it's basically a way of, an easy way of getting all of the elements that are in a slot. So you get this array. So what we're doing is we're looping over each of those nodes that's inside the slot. We're looking for anything that's marked iframe. So we're looking for that tag right there. And once we found it, let's see. So we're looking for an iframe, and if it doesn't exist, I think, yeah, we're doing a little query selector to see, okay, well, if you're not an iframe, might you have an iframe as a child? If you do, we're going to use that. So this is very similar to the recursive function that I showed a few weeks ago of recursively looking through slots to find a selector. But basically, at the end of the day here, we're looking for that iframe tag. So that's the iframe tag that it found. And whenever it finds it, it's gonna set it like a little internal variable, and then it's going to add a mutation observer. So with a mutation observer, basically a mutation observer is saying I want to monitor changes to an HTML element. I think we've talked about these before. And there's a few options that you can add to a mutation observer to tell it exactly what all I want you to monitor. In this case, what we want to do is we want to figure out whenever the resize events are happening on an iframe. And we're going to do that because this is our little hack to figure out if the iframe has loaded. So by us getting information about, we're going to set the attributes to true. And what that means is that whenever we actually run this mutation, this mutation observer is going to get run every time the height of the element has changed. So every time the height changes, we're going to be able to look at the target, which is the iframe itself. We're going to grab the offset height. So that's just grabbing the height of the element. And this is a really, a bizarre hack, but it's working. We're basically saying if the iframe is bigger than 100 pixels, then I feel pretty confident that there's some content in that iframe that is loading up. There's some visual content that the user is going to see. So that is where this web component has decided, okay, the iframe is in a state where I'm going to deem this the loading state of this web component is over. So I'm going to set that to false. And then I'm going to grab whatever the height of this iframe is and set it to an internal property. And that internal property is going to adjust the actual size of this web component itself. So what you get is, and then of course we're going to put some CSS on it so that whenever the height changes, we're going to add a little CSS transition so that it doesn't just jump, it sort of slides down. So what you get at the end of the day is a web component that has a loading state, and then it does a little slide transition.
That's hot.
So hot. So that's just like a little way that web components can augment some of the your default elements and make them improve the user experience of them. So yeah, that is this wonderful element.
And that is loading, in that specific example, that's loading something off of like the Elms or Drupal based media server for the H5P file, right?
Correct.
Oh, okay,
Correct.
cool.
Yeah, so let me scroll over here to see if I think I have a few of them. So here are two, one's a video and one's like a multiple choice. So as they load, they are then rendered to the screen. Now, how I previously had it was the logic looks something like this. It said, okay, whenever you find an iframe, I'm going to add an event listener to this. And that event listener is going to listen for the load event. And then it's going to set the this.loading equals false. Which,
but that's not guaranteed that the content is actually loaded, right? Just that the frame is.
It actually, no, it worked pretty well because I knew for sure that the content inside it was loaded. The problem is that it would wait for everything to load. So most of it would take forever. Basically, it'd take forever for them to show up because like if there were, web component assets loading on the Elm server that this thing didn't necessarily need to load, it would still wait and wait and wait for that load event to fire.
So what does this look like in implementation of iframe-loader? Does it wrap an iframe?
Yeah. Yep. So it just wraps around it.
And you have that approach because of why with the iframe? I'm just curious.
So whenever a user first gets to the page, if you don't have it on there, then the iframe has no size basically. So the user doesn't even know that there's an iframe there loading. Potentially.
Oh no, sorry. I don't mean that. I mean, like, did you do it because of like a regex or something? Because it seems like you could easily replace the iframe tag with like an iframe-loader tag and then not have to do the mutation observer stuff and inject your own iframe.
Yeah, that's a good question. So I actually ultimately want it to be H5P element. An H5P element uses the iframe-loader tag. So it looks something like this. Where it does something similar. It looks for any iframes in its slot and it puts it there, and then it wraps it around the iframe-loader. And then it adds some hex schema to provide a nice edit state for H5P elements specifically. So yeah, I think the reason, again, this goes back to our initial discussion with Sonia, like the difference between properties and slots. I always get stuck on that question because I'm sure whenever I made this element, I took a look at that and I was like, no, I want this thing to load even if the iframe-loader tag doesn't have a definition. I still want this iframe tag to load.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's so the only reason I would say it might be good to have some other fallback for this is iframes don't work in locally loaded versions of Chromium. And why we will eventually care about that is if you were to have a desktop-based version of the system, you wouldn't actually be able to work on it if there were iframes there, or at least not work on it without it running like absolute garbage. So the browser vendor's hack around this is the WebView tag, and the WebView tag can resource isolate, what are previously iframes rendering, so that they load way faster. For starters, but it's also more secure. So there's a lot of logic in hacks. It's either hacks or hacks CMS, I can't remember which, that basically ends up doing detections for whether or not you are running in a resource protected environment like a desktop. And then based on that, either injects an iframe or a web view.
So question.
I don't know how critical that is, but
does it kill? Like, does it like completely tank because there's an iframe, or could the iframe be there, but maybe iframe-loader could do that detection and replace the iframe?
That could be another, that could be another way to handle it.
Because if you're going to always use an iframe with iframe-loader, that could be our solution to all the things. And that way the iframe does load by default, and in most use cases, that's what we want. But then maybe iframe-loader could handle that logic.
Yeah.
Which would make it even more badass.
Yeah, and what you said is probably a better solution because, like, we don't have anything we're running in WebView yet. And I'm only aware of, and when I say tank, I mean, if you had testing I did, if there were 3 iframes on a page, which I mean, like, just so a page that had 2, if there were 3 iframes on a page, like, I'm talking computer crash level. Like, it's insane. Now you put a web view on, and you could throw, I think I had over 100 web views on the page without crashing. So it's pretty dramatic. Now, that's only something we'd get to when we get into desktop territory, which hopefully starting next week, we'll have a student who is largely going to be dedicated to working on that for the next couple months. But yeah, no, you're right, Nikki. That might be a better way to handle that, is in something that would do that enhancement, do the detection, and then do the rewrite there. Or maybe that detection happens up even higher, prior to this being output. The quote unquote backend goes, oh, make sure there's no iframe tags because this is going to brick in this environment.
Yeah, that's also a better way to handle it. Because I'd hate to see us lose that progressive ability for the vast majority of our current use cases.
Yep, that makes sense. And if there's now the other thing you could do on that, Mike, is you could inject lazy. I wonder how that would end up.
Oh, okay.
So the loading equals lazy attribute works on images and iframes. They added it to iframes, I think, after images. So you could find it, and then I don't know if you can set it that way. I'm honestly not sure if you could set it that way. Or whether you have to do like a, thing dot set attribute, because it's loading equals lazy. Did you just put lazy?
Oh, loading.
Yeah, it's iframe. It would be dot loading and then equals lazy, which it should map to. Now, you won't notice it in this example, but if you moved it way down in the page, so it did put loading equals lazy on there. Okay. Oh, you do have other ones down the page. Nice.
Oh, that's cool.
And then the key aspect there, obviously, being that the browser is handling all the logic associated with more or less intersection observers.
Gotcha.
So then that way the things below the manifold, that's okay. It does work that way. That's awesome. All right.
Nice.
Now, that's not going to be in everything. That's in Chrome. I can look that up. I haven't looked at loading equals lazy in a while. Is in Edge. Well, it's in Firefox now too. So it's in Edge, Firefox, Chrome, and Opera. So basically everything except for IE12, otherwise known as Safari products.
One other thing that I saw that I need to clean up is how to clean up an observer in the disconnect function.
You need to solve that?
Yeah, I forget how you do it.
I have it somewhere.
So I don't actually, I don't clean it up in that way.
Oh, okay.
So what I do is once the observer has met its objective, then I disconnect it.
Huh.
So if the objective of this is to find the iframe, right?
Yeah.
So down there, where you, once you have your iframe exist, which wouldn't be the mutation observer part, right? It would be on update. I want to listen to if loading state is true. Yes.
And once it's true, remove it.
Yes.
So on update, I get prop name.
No, it's properties changed. It's a whole
Oh.
object, and then you have to do a for each step through it. And then it's old value, comma, prop name. And then if loading is true, then I do the disconnection. I end up doing those on intersection observers as well. Like the count up. There's a count up element that we don't use. I basically made it to, to screw around with intersection observers. In which the counter goes, like 0 to 60, and as you scroll down, it starts counting. So then I do the disconnect when you hit the max value of the counter.
Gotcha.
Because you really don't care about it. Like once it's met its objective, it's really not related to disconnection. the other issue you end up getting around is there are edge cases where an element moves in the DOM and you've disconnected its observer because it got disconnected, and then you don't end up reconnecting it because it just got moved. So, yep, that would be what it looks like. Now you have Mutation Observer there too. Is that?
So this is just a reference to this definition. So I don't think you have to clean those up, do you?
Oh, okay, I see. But you're not applying the Mutation Observer. Yeah.
Right.
That makes sense.
Cool. I never know how to check these, but
How to check what?
Like that an observer has been removed. Like I don't know in Chrome how to check those. Something's wrong.
Oh yeah, does it you got a syntax error or something in there maybe?
Cal name.
Local name. Is slot in flatten observer? What? Is it update or updated?
Oh. Probably updated. Okay, so it's not dot remove. That's how I always
No, it is. It doesn't or no, maybe it's disconnect. I think it's disconnect. There it is.
Cool.
Of course, we'll see if they actually load.
Right.
Did you verify that loading is true, or just that loading changed? Yeah, it's loading true. What about the one if you scroll down the page to that other one that hasn't been? Of course, it also is saying in the background, waiting for media.science.pcu.edu. So maybe there's.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, I don't know where I think iframes show up under doc.
Oh, okay.
I think. Yeah, what if you hit preview on that? It would show you the. Oh, so maybe you can't disconnect it that early. The cascading tree, yay, it finished. Yeah. You can see it racing by there.
Huh.
All right, maybe you have to clean
Maybe you have
something
to
up there.
A second. Well, let's see. Where am I setting it to true? Oh. No, it's not true. It's false.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because it's no longer loading, isn't it? Yeah.
Oh, boy. All right. So when are we talking about Deno?
I mean, we still have a few minutes. You can talk about Deno.
I saw.
I know that's been your thing.
No, I saw that Thomas Ulmer from OpenWC, who was on the call earlier, he wrote some interesting thoughts on Deno and what that meant for the web and web components in general, and specifically TypeScript. and how that's going to mess with, adds an interesting variable.
That would be a good thing to talk to other people about, just in a more holistic sense, because I hate TypeScript. I think it's the devil, as I think I've called it Satan on other ones. And Deno does bring up an interesting, you can explain it. My assumption is that Deno just says like, hey, you don't have a package JSON, you just reference stuff and it runs. And
Yep.
it's kind of more of a, in alignment with Pika package and the unbundled builds type of worldview.
Yeah.
But then if you're not processing, which is what TypeScript requires, like TypeScript is actually marrying you to build routines that are complicated,
Right. And
at least at the moment.
and Deno's saying, oh, you don't need to do those anymore. That it's just in our server.
Why don't you describe what Deno is? 'Cause
Okay,
I only vaguely know what it is.
So yeah, me too. But
Everybody else I don't think does.
So Deno is a node rewrite. So the person who
And also a node palindrome. Or not palindrome.
Yeah,
Anagram.
it's a anagram. Yeah. So I think it's actually Deno. So Deno is a written by the same person who wrote Node.js, analyzing like what he felt he wished he could go back and do. And one of them was, the package management. So Deno is written in Rust, I think, and it out of the box compiles TypeScript, which is weird. So all the examples that you'll find are TypeScript. So I could put a .ts file, TypeScript file, on a server, and Brian could start a node, a Deno server, point to the URL where that .ts file is, and it'll just render. And that's because the TypeScript compiler is built into Deno. And one of the cool things that piqued my interest with it is that the API is written exactly as like a browser API. So you're trying to get your code as close to being browser compatible as possible and be able to run on a server. But that's definitely like, well, then why are you encouraging people to write TypeScript? Because you can't run TypeScript in the browser. So, and then everybody's saying, oh, well, no, that's what the TypeScript compiler's for. You just compile it to JavaScript.
So you're just getting away from compiling only to compile again.
Right. Now you can just write JavaScript. Like it handles that. So, which I think is cool. And it's going to support WASM, WebAssembly, which is really, I think, really powerful. But I think the way that they are handling their package management aligns perfectly with where we're envisioning the whole CDN-based approach going. Yeah, it's just that the reading Thomas Ulmer's feed this morning on Twitter about like saying this could encouraging people to put out TypeScript files is maybe not the best approach here.
I mean, it seems like we're getting closer to a world where you do just write it once and it's JavaScript and that executes server side locally and in the browser client side. So yeah, it's kind of like, well, then if you say, oh, and you could do TS and encourage TS, then you're kind of getting close, but then missing the mark on that vision. Like, it's sort of part of what you care about, but
right. So it might be 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but definitely something to keep in the back of your mind.
I mean, Microsoft, I did also see some messaging that their TypeScript-based code, they claim, takes 40% less time to compile than non-TypeScript-based code. Now, that could just be because of, the intricacies of JavaScript and compiling, and if types match all the way down,
right,
then that makes things happier.
Yeah.
I
Yeah,
mean,
for sure.
I don't know.
Dino did say that they will have to, they thought that the V8 engine was going to handle TypeScript better,
Mm.
but they realized that they've hit a wall and they can't make it any faster. So they're going to have to totally port TypeScript to Rust, which they said will take forever. So it's like, hey, here's 1.0, and we have a long way to go. So I don't know.
Cool. Yeah, that would make for a good conversation. I would like to actually just get some takes from different people in Polymer Slack or wherever about TypeScript, because I mean, I don't believe in TypeScript. You're all welcome to write TypeScript, but I'm not going to accept those PRs. I hate it that much.
The interesting thing is that you can VS Code, you can not have a TypeScript compiler, like don't have .ts files, and you could just put like @ts check, and it'll treat your code as if it's TypeScript. Like it'll analyze it and say, hey, this type doesn't match up. So it's like all the benefits of TypeScript without with having a JS file, and the browser can run it.
Yes.
I don't know why more people don't just do that.
You start wondering at times if, well, you pull the thread on like unbundling. Hey, we don't need to bundle things anymore. How much less time is wasted in Webpack and Rollup and all these other configuration types of things where the people that made them understand them because they made them, and then they tell the next
their
person.
Workflow.
Yeah, it fits their workflow for whatever strange thing, but their workflow is only because of some other decision. Like, well, I mean, we're not going to have CSS people opening .js files. They're not color coded the right way. They couldn't possibly write that CSS there. So we'll write modules for this other system that tricks JavaScript into processing CSS so I can pull it in. So I don't need to know what their CSS is because I don't know CSS. And, oh, this person wrote stuff in TypeScript because we're treating this more like an operating system and we need well-defined types. And then meanwhile, you get the downstream and it's spaghetti. Let's mix all this together. Webpack, yay.
It
I
really
made you an app.
It really just seems like it comes down to the difference between people that have like companies that have thousands of developers versus everybody else. If I had 1,000 developers, I'd probably love TypeScript and I'd probably need to break out those files like you just described.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That is limited resource. That's limited resource crowd versus non, right? I mean, we get back to our Drupal multi-site versus, just deploy in Docker. Don't you just have a 100-person company and just deploy stuff into this swarm? Well, I don't have dedicated DevOps people because I kind of have to do that too. Shut up. It's more efficient. I'll do it. When really we're talking big companies versus small companies. I mean, I bet you'd see the same lines around React.
Yeah.
I bet a lot of smaller companies just, hit the ground running with React. And then you get up to the monoliths, the Googles of the world, and they go, we can't just have 50 different React apps, like not being able to mix all the code together in the same way because we have Angular teams and we have Vue teams and everything else. So then Web Components emerges there. Meanwhile, smaller shops that are dedicated to React are like, why do you guys care about this? This doesn't even matter.
Yeah.
So anyway.
So don't at me.
Don't at me. But you should at the Hacks Camp Twitter account to learn more about the project or get on this show and ask questions and have a conversation. We had some good conversations and a lot of issues generated this week. Thanks, Nikki. Bringing on people that want to give us more interesting work to do. So if you want to give us more interesting work, go to bit.ly/hackslack to get into our Slack channel. We'll give you a link to get into Uncode here. We record every week, 3 to 5 on Fridays. That's Eastern Standard Time. And so with that, we close episode 9, which will mean next week is double digits. I was about to say digit doubles. So tune in next week for digit doubles. Ta-ta.